Okay, now I'd like to show you some tips and tricks on darts and tucks. And I think darts are one of the single most misunderstood operations in sewing quality garments. So let's get started with just a simple plain dart. And the way we mark a plain dart is to clip at the seam allowance rather than, there'll be two little circles there usually or a mark. All you have to do is make a simple clip at each side. And then we've taken the sewing machine needle just shy of where we want the dart to end and push that needle through the fabric. And what that did was make a hole. It made a hole that just the sewing machine operator can see. It won't destroy the fabric, but it'll be enclosed inside the dart. So again, if you've ever purchased a garment and you tried to move the dart and you found there was a hole in the fabric, that's because this is the way they mark it in the industry. They don't use a sewing machine needle, but they do make a hole. So we want that hole to be just shy of where the dart is going to end. So we'll take the fabric and we'll fold it so that those notches match. All right, see how easy it is to find where those notches match. And then we know that here's where our hole is. And for the purpose of the camera, I want you to be able to see this. So let me just move over here and get a gel pen where I can just make a little mark here so you can see where that hole is. Because again, I want to sew just past that hole. That's my indication of where my dart should end. So we'll start near the edge, we'll back up. Now, we want to make sure this fabric stays nice and flat and the two layers stay together the way they should. So the way we want to hold the fabric here is I'm going to use my left hand and I'm going to be pulling slightly down here below. It just holds all these layers together. So I'm putting a little pressure with my left hand and I'm pulling down just slightly with my index finger and thumb. And I'm heading for that line, but I want to get just past that line. So I'm going to stitch down here. And when you get close to that spot, what I want you to do is end up about 2 to 3 stitches on the edge of the fabric. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want your dart to end up too abruptly. If it ends up abruptly, there'll be a little pucker right there. And specifically for a bust dart, that's very disturbing to the eye to see that little pucker there. So you're going to just, let me do it one more time. Where's my marker? Do it one more time for you. Okay. And the other thing I want to tell you is that I know if you worked in couture sewing or took any couture sewing classes, what they tell you to do at the end of the dart is to tie the threads together. In the garment industry, they don't tie the threads together. They just continue to stitch right off the fabric, and the threads will chain together. And there's your dart, and you have the threads chained together, so they're never going to come undone. And then your darts will lay nice and flat. Of course, these will need to be pressed in the direction according to the pattern guide, but just nice and flat. So again, stitch right off the fabric and allow those threads to knot together, and then you don't have to tie them. Certainly, if you feel more comfortable, go ahead and tie them, but I'll tell you that for 25 years I've been doing my darts like this and I've never had one come undone. So that might give you some feeling of security. Okay, so that's a simple dart. Now when we're doing sometimes it's called a fisheye dart, a sheath dart, but you're going to, it's in the middle of the garment and it's shaped like two triangles put together. So here's I've got it marked with the circles, again with the, the needle. So here are my holes. And I'm going to stitch from here to here, then I'm going to come back and stitch from here to here. And overlap at that point. All right. So here's how we'll do it. We'll start here at this hole. We'll turn the machine to aim toward our mark here, but again, we want to go just past it. Press down with your left hand, the pads of your fingers. Chain off, then come back, start where you left off, but stitch over just a few stitches to make sure it stays secure. You don't want to back stitch too much because you don't want it to get lumpy in there. So just by going over top of the previous stitching, I think that does just as well as back stitching, but doesn't cause the lump. And so now I've chained off again. And then to make this dart lay nice and flat, because it is so odd, it's not going to press over well, you have to clip it all the way to the stitching in the center. Now when you press it, you press them in opposite directions, and then once it's pressed, the garment will lay as it should. Obviously, it'll have a contour. That's what a dart is for, to create a contour. Okay, so that is our fisheye dart. Now, I have a couple of really kind of just fun little tricks with what we call a one-thread dart or a one-thread tuck. And this is accomplished by doing something very strange to begin with. So we're going to bring our bobbin thread up. We're going to, you put right over left and then left over right. So put those two together, then take that same thread. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing with thread. It's so clumsy. Okay, and then this one under. So just remember, left over right, right over left. There we go. Okay, now we have a square knot. Now the next step is to pull that knot back through the needle. And by keeping the thread parallel to the eye of the needle, that knot will just slip right through the eye of the needle just like that. It's just that easy. Now that'll work on a size 1280 or above. When you get to about a size 10 needle, you may have difficulty getting it to pull through the eye. And in that case, you'll have to make your knot on the other side of the eye of the needle. So we're going to pull this up until we have the knot near the top. Right, here's our knot. Let me wind this onto the spool so you can see. All right, we've got that knot way up there. It's not going to be any problem now. Now, what I'm going to do, like I said, is called a one-thread dart. These darts have to be very, very narrow to make this work. And this is the time when you're going to start at the end of the dart, not at the top of the dart. So you can start down where the point of the dart is. And you won't have any holes in the fabric because this particular kind of dart would be used as an exterior dart. And a lot of times you see that in designer wear. Well, they'll just try something a little bit different to give a different texture to the outside of the garment. And you can create all kinds of sunburst darts on a neckline or whatever. And now that once you learn this, I'm sure you'll see examples of it after this. But anyway, we're going to start and we're going to say this is the end of our dart right here. So we'll start right on the edge of the fabric. And we're going to just come up and let's say our dart is here. Now we want a narrower dart. Let's go there. And so this is a very narrow dart, and we're just going to stitch the dart like we would normally, right up and off the fabric. And now what you see is at the end of this dart, there are no tails of thread to tie off or pull through or anything, because all you're going to have is a little loop of the thread across the end of the fabric. And certainly I would imagine you would be using thread that matched the fabric. And in this case, I'm using contrasting thread so you can see what I did. But there you have it, that's a one thread dart. You can do the same thing with a very narrow tuck. And it's not a dart, but you just stitch right along that edge. So anytime you want that dart to end someplace within the interior of the garment, you don't want all those threads to have to pull through and tie, this is the way you'll have to do it. However, now you have to remember you have a knot up here, and you've got to pull that back through the needle. And did you know this is the way I thread my machine when I'm changing thread? I just tie a square knot. So if I wanted to change from white to blue, I'd put the blue on here, I'd tie my square knot here, and then I would just pull the thread right through the needle, and I'm ready to sew. No rethreading the sewing machine. I know a lot of people do that with their serger, but they've never thought of doing it with the sewing machine, and it works just as easily with the sewing machine. Now I'm going to show you a very large tuck where we can hide the fact that there are any threads. So there have been lots of times in fashion where there were really big shoulder pleats or tucks. And again, you don't want those thread tails hanging there. So the way that you do it with a tuck is you come in to where you want your tuck to start. And we all know how to bring up the bobbin thread. There we go. So we want to bring up the bobbin thread. So we're going to set our needle down where our tuck's going to start. Lift up the foot and bring that bobbin thread up. There we go. And here's our bobbin thread. Now keeping it very much in place from where that bobbin thread came out. That's key here. Okay, let the foot down. Now everything will stay as it is. Tie another square knot, just like we did before. Remember, that's right over left and left over right. And then make sure you give a nice tug to make sure that that knot's going to stay secure as it goes through the needle. Now we'll just pull that back through the needle. Remember, get it parallel. All right, and then we want to carefully lift up the foot so we can pull this thread up further. All right, this time I've only pulled the thread up. Well, let me get it just a little bit further. There we go. I'm sure that that's going to be enough, but you always want to err on the side of more than you need. That way you don't have any calamities. And again, once you're done doing something like this, you've got to make sure you remember to pull that back through and cut that knot so that you aren't sewing along and come across a knot in your thread. So now it's just a simple matter of stitching the tuck. So we'll stitch a nice straight line here. And there you have it. You've got a tuck and you have no threads at the end on either side. And that is a one thread tuck. And that's the end of our section on darts and tucks.